When animals aren't actively cooled under these conditions, they're going to be heat stressed. And then when we looked at production responses, the animals that were cooled the entire time made more milk than animals that were heat stressed the entire time. What was interesting, though, was the animals that were heat stressed with OmniGen actually had production that was similar to the cooling groups. OmniGen didn't do anything sort of extra in the cows that were cooled, but the cows that were heat stressed, it allowed them to recover that lost milk versus the animals that were just heat stressed in the dry period. If they got OmniGen and they were cooled, no real response there, no real effect observed. But if they were heat stressed without OmniGen, they made significantly less milk. The animals that got the OmniGen during the dry period and were heat stressed actually made the same milk or not different milk from the animals that were cooled. There's more alveoli if an animal is cooled. And then when we looked at this with the OmniGen, we see a similar increase in alveoli. So it's consistent with greater capacity in those animals that are heat stressed if they get OmniGen versus the animals that don't. So that'd be consistent with that higher milk yield potential. These studies we do between November and March, so relatively mild conditions in Florida. And this does induce heat stress, not quite as extensively as the animals under normal summer conditions, but it certainly increases temperature and increases respiration rate relative to those cows that don't have the blanket. So in this case, we started the OmniGen treatment at the same time we started the heat stress. So no ramp up phase. And that's kind of consistent with some of my thinking about actions of OmniGen that are a little bit different from the idea that we're affecting immune function. I think it's more to do with how those animals are responding to general heat stress. And there are certainly some of the ingredients within OmniGen that would sort of be consistent with a greater capacity to rid the animal of heat. So we started this treatment of heat stress at the same time we started the OmniGen treatments. So this panel is just showing you the intakes in the animals during the dry period and the sort of labels down there, the NB, that's no blanket control. The next group is the electric blanket, EB control in the open symbol. That grayish bar is no blanket plus OmniGen. And the last line there in the stippled is the electric blanket plus OmniGen. So the only one that was different was the heat stress, the electric blanket control, versus any of those other ones in terms of dry matter intake. We looked at water intake, and here we see that animals that are heat stressed consume more water. Doesn't matter if they got OmniGen or didn't get more OmniGen, right? She's got higher water intake because she's hotter versus those control animals. And then we looked at milk production and the animals that were heat stressed without OmniGen, lowest production in the first 2 months anyway of lactation versus any of the other groups. So very consistent with our other study that OmniGen seemed to rescue some of those milk production responses that we observe with heat stress.